When we visited Sequim, Washington for our wing walking experience, we had no idea that just north of this quaint town on the Olympic Peninsula is the longest natural sand spit in North America. Stretching almost 7 miles north into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the Dungeness Spit continues to grow in length by about 15 feet per year. Even though this trail may not be considered challenging in a technical sense, this trail is still demanding because it is 10.2 miles long and the vast majority of that is going to be taking place in sand. If you're wanting to do this hike yourself, just know that it is open daily from 7 a.m. till half an hour before sunset. But that is not the only thing that you need to keep in mind, because you need to pay attention to the tide tables. The spit is quite narrow, and if you do it during high tide, you're not going to have very much space to walk. This trail takes most people right around 5 hours to complete, 2 and change out and 2 and change back. But you know us, being the ambassadors for the sloth hiking team, it took us closer to 6 because we spent quite a bit of time at the lighthouse. Right around 3/10 of a mile into the hike, you will come to 2 lookouts that give you your first picturesque views of the spit. It does look pretty surreal as the narrow strip of sand disappears off into the distance. And here we are arriving at that second lookout point. The views from both lookouts are pretty similar, but I think that the scenery is just a tiny bit less obstructed from the lower viewpoint. After passing the 2 lookout points, the trail will descend rapidly towards the beach. There is a decent chance that you will see wildlife on this hike, and as much as we want to give that little seal pup a hug, it is our responsibility to give them their space. If you just have to have a close-up shot of a harbor seal, we recommend bringing a powerful zoom lens for your camera. That way you get your shot and the seals stay happy. As narrow as this spit seems, its usable space for hikers is actually quite a bit smaller. With the exception of a couple of viewpoints, you are only allowed to walk on the north or left side of the spit. The south or right side is a protected nature habitat. Once you reach this vertical pole that is about half a mile from the start of the beach, you'll have one of the few opportunities to go over and check out the other side of the spit. Just be sure to mind all of the signs and not venture into any of the restricted areas. In addition to the tides, the other thing that you want to keep an eye on is the weather. Conditions can change pretty rapidly here, and since you're hiking on a beach, there is no shelter until you reach the lighthouse. And the other thing that you don't have access to until you reach the lighthouse is drinking water, so be sure to bring plenty of that. Along the way, we found a bunch of those little seaweed balls that are like nature's bubble wrap. Yeah. What can I say? We are slightly easily amused. We probably would have popped all of these if they weren't being protected by these little creepy flying bugs. If you're like us, you may not have heard the term spit used like this before, and you may be wondering why it's called that. Well, a spit or sand spit is a deposition bar or beach landform off of coasts or lake shores. It develops in places where re-entrance occurs, such as coves headlands, by the process of longshore drift by longshore currents. The drift occurs due to waves meeting at the beach at an oblique angle, moving sediment down the beach in a zigzag pattern. This is complemented by longshore currents, which further transport sediment through the water alongside the beach. These currents are caused by the same waves that cause the drift. And now that we had a very educational moment, here's me being a giant man-child and trying to use seaweed as a whip. At this point, we are nearing our destination and the lighthouse is poking up over the driftwood on the beach. The lighthouse is open from 9 to 5, and we highly recommend going during open hours because it is really cool to check out. If you don't mind carrying your lunch all the way out here, you will be rewarded because there are a lot of picnic tables here, and this is just a really neat spot to stop for lunch. In addition to being able to say that you hiked the longest natural sand spit in North America, you can also brag about this lighthouse too. Even though it is called the new Dungeness Lighthouse, it is one of the oldest lighthouses in the Northwest. Before the days of GPS, this was one of the few ways to keep boats from running ashore. And this lighthouse takes its job seriously because it has been running its light consistently since 1857. Considering its age, it still looks like it's in really great shape, and this whole scene looks like it's something straight out of an oil painting. As I mentioned before, since we visited during operating hours, we headed inside and climbed these 74 stairs up to the top. On our way to the top, we stopped in this small room that had a bunch of neat artifacts, and then we continued on our way up to the lantern room. There were some volunteers up in the lantern room, and they shared with us some of their wildlife sightings and gave us some really cool facts about the area. The view from the top is stunning, and there are also these little markers that give you the distances to some of the towns and geological features in the area. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to go outside the lantern room, and since there are only so many people allowed in the lighthouse at a time, we took our pictures, asked our questions, and then headed back to the ground floor. Here you'll find a museum with tons of lighthouse history, including all these different types of bulbs. Even though it is a fairly small space, there is an absolute ton of information packed into this museum. It gives you a small glimpse into how lighthouse keepers lived, and it's all really fascinating. After leaving the lighthouse, we realized that there are a couple of other small trails in the area if you want to explore. All of them are tiny, probably 1/10 of a mile or shorter, and they just take you to different viewpoints of the lighthouse and the spit. We ended up just doing this one, which was pretty much directly behind the lighthouse. And honestly, it's pretty, but it's nothing mind-blowing. The views are pretty much similar to everything that you've seen on the way out, so if you need all of your energy to get back to the trailhead, you wouldn't be missing out on a ton by skipping this. If you do go exploring, be sure to watch for keep out signs because they are scattered about, and it's good to respect those nature areas. If you're lucky, you might see a whale out here. The volunteers in the lighthouse said that they did spot one around sunset the day before. We didn't see any whales when we went, but we did see either a harbor seal or an otter, and you'll see him in just a little bit. It was getting a little bit later in the day at this point, and we knew that the tide was about to start rising, so we knew it was time to kick it into high gear and get back. Just in the short amount of time that we had spent at the lighthouse, the water level had risen quite a bit. Luckily, we still had a fair amount of beach left because it would make things a little bit more challenging having to weave our way through the driftwood on the way back. And here's that sea life encounter I was talking about. It was nothing incredible, but it beats nothing. Even though we were trying to get back to the trailhead as quickly as possible, we couldn't help but stop and pick up some trash and step on a couple more of those seaweed balls. For some reason, the way back always seems faster, and before we knew it, we were already back at this big log. As we made our way towards the end of the beach, it was really cool because we spotted the Mason Wing Walking Academy's biplane doing loops in the sky just like we had a couple days prior. Unfortunately, it was just a little bit too far away to get on video, but it was so cool seeing it from another perspective. If you haven't seen that video yet, be sure to click in the upper corner right now because that was an experience that neither of us will ever forget. To get the full experience, we ended up taking the primitive trail on the way back instead of the main trail which we took on the way out. This is a nice and simple walk through more of Washington's pristine green forests. We don't believe that this adds a lot of distance to the hike, and it just ends up meeting back up with the main trail. And with that, our hike had come to a close, and we can say that we enjoy very long walks on the beach. What are your favorite trails in Washington? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because that really helps our channel out. And for more information about the Dungeness Spit as well as other awesome Washington adventures, head on over to 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐼𝐒.com.